The New England Patriots may be on summer break, but while the players enjoy some time away from the team facilities, the coaching staff and front office have the opportunity to examine the work they've done this offseason and put the finishing touches on their 90-man roster before the start of training camp in late July. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Patriots Roundtable Podcast. Alongside Tyler Geis, I'm Eddie Murata, and on today's show, we'll be reviewing the New England Patriots' greatest remaining positions of need, where they might add to the roster, and where they're expecting some more significant contributions from their younger players. Tyler, it feels like the Patriots turned over every stone this offseason to improve the top end of their roster through free agency, through the NFL draft, and through the trade market. New England aggressively pursued upgrades at premium positions, opening their win now window even wider with several moves to secure stability around their third-year quarterback. I think as we enter this discussion today, it's worth noting that most of the positions we're going to be debating are depth needs more than anything. And that's a much different conversation than we'd be having at any recent point in any of the most previous off seasons for this team. So I guess to start things off, Tyler, how do you feel about the Patriots offseason roster turnover as a whole? Then we can get into more specific positions that they may still want to add to a little bit later on.
You mentioned the win now window, and I think Elliot Wolf, Mike Vrabel, that whoever else is in the room there as well, knows that we need to open this window up a little wider per se. Not make it 2 to 3 years. Let's try 4 or 5 if we can get something out of that. And I think that was their goal. They have to kind of develop young, create some insurance for a lot of their starters, even if it's people coming in on a 1 or 2 year deal. We'll talk about that a little bit in this episode. But I'm very impressed with the choices they had to make with letting people out the door as well as letting people in, and draft picks. An obvious one is Stephon Diggs. That plagued the news cycle probably from after the Super Bowl till free agency. I think you and I both know that both parties were heading towards a divorce by the time before it was even announced. Other players in the secondary as well, seeing them kind of leave and whatnot. But I think New England knows that they have to open that window wider. Like I said, they have a young quarterback who has proved a lot of physical and mental now prowess. He is killing it in the film room, apparently, from what you and I talked about in last week's episode. And he's watching a lot of Tom Brady film, which I know it was said he did last year, but there's a lot more going into that right now, from what we are being told. And there needs to be the right pieces around that. So no complaints. I know, come for free agency, everybody gets nervous. Why are you doing this? Why is that person leaving? Why are you trading for this guy? Why sign this guy only to a 1 year deal? And when the dust settles on it, I think we all kind of see why. So I am very, very happy with what I've seen over the last 3 months.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a delicate balance to strike, especially in an off season of this kind of nature for the Patriots. You're coming off of an unexpected Super Bowl run, and I think a lot of teams would kind of hold firm when they see their roster overperform the way that this Patriots roster seemingly did last season, and kind of just stay with the status quo that got you to where you were. And that's not at all what we saw from this team this offseason as they continue to build a sustainable contender for the next coming years. This could have very well been a team that just went out and re-signed all of their in-house free agents and then just focused on the draft. And we saw them do some of those things, but in large part, there was a greater amount of roster turnover than I think either of us were expecting. And I think in many regards, that was ultimately a positive thing for this team. You're looking around, especially at some of the starter positions, where you're anticipating those new additions being upgrades at positions of need. And they were very punctual about going out and targeting those specific positions of need, especially in areas that we saw kind of pop up as deficiencies during their postseason run when the competition level was ramped up a little bit more. but I don't think that they went out and sacrificed the future of the team to open that win now window for 2026 a little bit wider. I think that's also the balance that you have to strike there is, okay, we have this window. Drake May's on a rookie contract. How do we maximize the talent around him without ultimately hurting our chances once we do re-sign him to that lucrative long-term extension that everybody in the New England region is expecting him to get as soon as next offseason? How do we do that without completely decimating our ability to build a team around him? And I thought that there was a nice mix of adding players that have long-term developmental paths to becoming contributors on the team while still going out and getting those higher end upgrades at positions that, again, were needs that were identified through the playoff run, whether that be that top flight wide receiver with a guy like AJ Brown, or even along the offensive line, bringing in a guy with Pro Bowl caliber like Elijah Vera Tucker, trying to move Jared Wilson over to center to make things a little bit more cohesive on that offensive line and overall just improve the play of the entire group. So again, a tough balance for them to strike there in terms of win now, but still have an eye for the future. And I thought that they did a very fine job at threading that needle this offseason. All right, let's turn the page now to talking about these positions a little bit more specifically, spots where the Patriots still could add. I think that, March and April are filled with a lot of projection for these players, what they could end up looking like, how they could fit into the system. And as you get on the practice field in late May and early June, those projections start to turn into a little bit more of reality, or at least how much reality that we can gather from practices in t-shirt and shorts rather than in full pads. So Tyler, let's take a look at some of these positions here where maybe the roster dynamic we feel like has changed a little bit through the spring after we see these guys on the field. What's your first position that you're anticipating the Patriots could be going out and looking to add to this summer before we get into training camp?
Well, this is an obvious one, and with them having some time off before we get to training camp, I think this is at the forefront of what they're talking about. It's on the forefront of our list, a tight end. And not just in a specific tight end, looking for that wide tight end, looking for that blocking tight end, guy who can go out and make a few catches here and there, but primarily to aid in the run game. And Julian Hill, obviously, is the cause for this search. Hill coming in, I believe, on a 3-year deal out of Miami, very much was fitting that mold of that kind of tight end. Season-ending injury, knee injury, I believe. He is going to be gone. So I think the Patriots need to find someone on a quick, short, plug-and-play 1-year deal for 2026, because they'll probably, I would think, bring Hill back next season. No issue. I don't want to predict the future necessarily. But the flip side of that is you have Hunter Henry, who's on a contract year, aging tight end. Maybe he's a Patriot in 2027. Maybe he's on a year-to-year deal. Maybe he's goes and rides off into the sunset somewhere else or retires. We don't know yet. Then you have rookie Eli Raridan, who shows a lot of poise, I feel. And I think, he was a favorite of you and I's in the mock draft episodes. And one thing we brought up in the mock draft was guy survived 2 ACL tears. And that's a lot of grit. That's a tough kid. But this is the NFL. You do not want to play those games with injuries and taking a rookie and just putting him on the field in that position out of the gate is a big roll of the dice. I mean, the Pats have done it in the past. Rob Gronkowski started his rookie year and whatnot. Eli Raridan got like some slight Gronk comparisons, I think, from Brian Hoyer on his podcast. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not. Time will tell. But Raridan, I don't want to see him on the field all the time either. I'd like to see him probably, maybe we just test some waters if the Patriots are up by 30 points against the New York Jets or something. Nice little jab at the Jets. But there's some players out there that I think could come in on a 1-year deal and just kind of take a little load off of the Patriots' worries about filling that Julian Hill role. Will Dissly, I believe, is a free agent right now I think he was on the Chargers or the Seahawks last year. I know he played at both those teams. He's, that wide type tight end that could come in and whatnot and fill that role. But another kind of one that's been really tied to it, and I wrote about it for the site, is Pharaoh Brown. Was with the Patriots 2023. was that blocking tight end, pretty much played that role. He is an NFL journeyman. I mean, he's played all over. I think he is a free agent from the Cardinals this past season, I believe. But with the Patriots in 2023, 17 games, 13 catches, 200 yards, got a touchdown, one sole touchdown from Mac Jones against the New York Jets. All right, I'm taking the jabs here. The Jets on the show. And but obviously that was a different system. That was the tail end of the Belichick era. And I don't think that really kind of matters with a guy like him who's just bounced around the team and whatnot. If they can just plug him into the system and make him what they wanted Julian Hill to be, I think that's a win for the Pats. A lot of chatter online that the Patriots could pursue him, bring him back into their system. And I mean, I know we're not necessarily picking favorites here with who they can plug in and create some insurance for New England going forward. But Brown right now, I feel, is the kind of front runner in that position unless we get some sort of shock in the next couple weeks or a month.
Yeah, I agree. I think Brown would be probably out of the small list of tight ends that are available that kind of fit that wide blocking tight end mold. He would be my favorite. And I do agree that this is also a position, and it sounds like even through Mike Vrabel's comments last week at mandatory minicamp, this is a position that they're probably going to go out and try and find another body to fill that Hill role, at least early on in the season, while these younger tight ends kind of get up to speed with the offense. We know that tight end is one of the more intricate developmental paths for immediate contributions for players around the NFL. They have a litany of different responsibilities, both in the running game and in the passing game, as a run blocker, as a pass blocker, as a pass catcher. That's a lot to adjust to for younger players first trying to get their feet wet in the NFL. So a lot of times you don't see them with those instant impacts from day one. And it sounds like that's certainly kind of the path that we've gotten from Eli Raridan and even from a Tanner Arkin to that point. But on the flip side of that, for me, this is also personally a position where I would be a little bit slower to fill that role, just because I want to see what these young players have to offer. The Patriots did invest quite a bit in that tight end position with younger developmental talent, not only this offseason, but last offseason as well with CJ Dupree. He was one of their higher paid undrafted free agents of last year's class. He stuck around the roster the entire year. So what kind of a year two jump is he going to have in this system now? I would like to see that kind of training camp battle for that third tight end spot between Arkin and Dupree. And then at that point, if you get a couple of weeks into training camp or into the preseason and you're still not liking what you see out of either of those players, then maybe consider adding another body at that point. But I like what they have with these young players. I think if all you're looking for is an option as a blocker, maybe Tanner Arkin is a good fit for that. He was essentially a sixth offensive lineman at Illinois. That's the way that they used him there in college. Dupree also has a little bit of potential as a bigger body to give you a little bit in that area of the game. So if you're not looking for this guy that's going to catch 40 or 50 passes during the course of the regular season, and it doesn't sound like that's what they're looking for right now, I would rather see them give these younger players an opportunity to show what they can bring to the table. You can even throw Jack Westover into that mix. Yeah, he played fullback last year. He was a converted tight end. It looks like, especially in Julian Hill's absence, he was getting a lot of run as the second tight end with the first team offense this spring. How long does that last is still a reasonable question to ask when you do have guys like Eli Raridan and some other bigger bodies like Arkin and Dupree that could more fill that blocking tight end role. But I think that they do have plenty of players there right now to kind of see what they have and sort things out from there. So personally, I would be a little bit slower to add to that position, but obviously it sounds like, at least on the team's end, that's one area where they're looking to add. Any pushback on me there?
No, I can see why they would kind of go to depth as well. You know, let's see what a young guy can do in this situation, or some guy who doesn't really got his due yet. I don't know. I look at their cap space. Maybe they still got some money to spend for a 1-year, $5 million contract or something. Like it's kind of one way or the other for the Patriots. But I could also see them dipping into their pool of that tight end room to see if they can plug in for a year, basically.
All right, so my first position is edge rusher, and this is a position that the Patriots started the offseason with some uncertainty at and heading into July. I think there are a lot of questions that still remain with this group. Last season, New England ranked 24th in the NFL in pressure rate, and that's just not the level of production that you're looking for at a premium position on a Super Bowl contending team. They did a lot of work this offseason to reinvent this group. Caleb Chason, Anthony Jennings, and Jelani Tavai all let go. Dre'Mont Jones and Gabe Akis were the big ticket adds to the room. And all in all, this is a position where Mike Vrabel seems to be content with what they have, and he said as much during his media availability at mandatory minicamp last week. I understand that on the surface. They're expecting to get Harold Landry back on the field with a lot more production out of him this year. He had a hot start to 2025 with 22 pressures and 6 sacks in his first 5 games with the Patriots last season before suffering a knee injury in week 6 that limited him for the remainder of the season. Jones should be an upgrade over Chason, especially as an edge rusher on early downs in running situations. And Akis brings another power rusher to this unit. So it seems like everyone in the building has been impressed with those guys and the development that they've gotten from Elijah Ponder and Braden Swinson as they enter year 2 with the team. If everybody is out there and they're all healthy, I think this is a really good group. But this hasn't been the situation for this position room all spring long, and it's unclear how that is going to be resolved moving forward. Landry hasn't been on the field at all as he's rehabbing his knee injury, and he's on the wrong side of 30 now as we enter 2026. Akis hasn't been on the field as he's been recovering from a knee procedure himself and is the only unsigned second-round pick in the NFL right now. So, and they've been left in this position all spring long where Dre'Mont Jones and Elijah Ponder have been taking the vast majority of the first team reps as edge defenders all spring. And even getting those guys in Landry and Akis back out there, there are going to be some limitations for both players. Landry is likely going to be on some sort of snap count for the foreseeable future. And I think that both of us were higher on Akis than a lot of other people as far as being an instant impact player on all 3 downs. At very least, I think that his extensive time hurts that projection now. He'll likely start his career as more of a situational rusher. So if this is any foreshadowing for what they're going to be dealing with at the edge during the regular season, I just don't think that that's enough to reliably, consistently rely on for the entirety of the regular season. And right now, they're just one injury away from being in a very dire situation there. So while I like the room, I do think that this is an area where they should seriously consider adding another rotational piece. I know that there have been trade discussions tossed out there for guys like Kayvon Thibodeau for a while now. I'm still not quite on board with that one. I think that you have enough young developmental talent and players making up this group, and an ad like that could subtract from those guys' overall long-term growth as players. So I would be looking more so to add a veteran free agent to come in and bridge the gap in the rotation until you have a little bit more certainty on what you're getting from guys like Akis, Ponder, and Swinson on a snap-in and snap-out basis. I'll throw a name out there for a guy that I think fits the bill pretty well for this team, and that would be Jadeveon Clowney, former number 1 overall pick for the Houston Texans in 2014. And as far as number 1 overall picks go, I think he's somewhat underwhelmed, at least in pass rushing production at this point in his career. He's never had a season with over 10 sacks, but has found a way to be a consistent producer with each stop he's made, especially as a run defender. While the pass rushing production hasn't always been there, nobody's ever questioned his ability to set the edge, and we know how important that is to a Mike Vrabel defense. He's had 2 separate stints with Vrabel in his career, both in Houston when Vrabel was the defensive coordinator and in Tennessee in 2020, and is coming off an 8.5 sack season just last year. Now he's 33 years old, so this isn't a signing that would be considered a long-term investment nor a full-time starter, but I do think that he's almost exactly what you would be looking for here. He's a great insurance policy in the event that the edge room looks as thin as it does now at any point during the year, and a reliable defender against the run. So even though the Patriots may not be too keen on adding another edge rusher right now, I think this is one that you have to look at based on what we've seen this spring and what other options are on the open market like Clowney that would fit their needs.
I like the pick or the signing if the Patriots go after it. For the sake of just adding in my 2 cents here, I actually do want to. I do think that the Pats should go get somebody, and should go get somebody that's necessarily maybe a little past their prime. They can get on a cheap 1-year deal here. Maybe get them to come down a little bit in price. And the reason why I bring that up is because a guy like Joey Bosa, I think I'm reading that his tag might be around $11 million for a 1-year deal. He, of course, was in Buffalo last year. He was kind of playing mostly in a rotational role last year for the Bills, but he got 5 sacks, 42 pressures, and led the entire NFL with 5 forced fumbles for the Bills. I actually forgot he was in Buffalo last year, honestly, because he wasn't on the field that much. And I think, again, I'm just looking at the Pats cap space. If they can kind of knock his number down a few mil, maybe a little bit, get him under $10 million or something on a 1-year deal. Again, I don't think they're going to pursue it, but there has been some rumors with Bosa and the Patriots potentially being a landing spot since this whole Akis thing started, because you and I both believe Akis was probably, or maybe it was just me, I can't remember, but probably was going to be on the field week 1. With this situation, even if he gets to that point and he's ready to go, I still think they got to probably put him behind some experience a little bit, see how he takes shape by midseason. I like Clowney better than Bosa in terms of this situation, but I think just for the sake of having a little bit of discussion here, I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots court him at some point in the next month or so and see if they want to bring him in again, maybe balance it out, put him, on some limited reps and whatnot, so they can bring in Akis as well throughout the regular season. But yeah, I don't necessarily trust what's under, in the backups in terms of the edge rusher room and what we're seeing and whatnot. So I am completely on board with a quick 1-year contract for somebody to come in and just give them a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah, the Bills, of course, went out and got Bradley Chubb as a replacement for Joey Bosa this offseason. I'm still kind of waiting for the 2 Bosa brothers to link up in San Francisco, with Nick Bosa being out there with the 49ers. It feels like at this point in Joey Bosa's career, maybe that would be a good fit for him right now. For me, I think that he, of course, is a fantastic pass rusher, but he's maybe a little bit more of a pass rush specialist than what the Patriots would be looking for. Right. That's kind of, to me, the reason why you move on from a player like Caleb Chase on, and it's kind of come out since that they were looking for a little bit more well-rounded, a player that can give you more on early downs in obvious running situations from that edge defender. Again, with Gabe Akis being a little bit limited, I think that's the first area that is kind of taken away for him, where maybe you're more comfortable with saying, okay, this is an obvious passing down, just pin your ears back, go after the quarterback, we'll throw you out there in situations like that. But when there's a little bit more to read on the defensive end, when you have the mix of pass and run both in play, I think that they're looking for a guy that's going to give them a little bit more in terms of setting the edge on early downs. Bosa, of course, you mentioned all the statistics there. A very productive, still at this point in his career, pass rusher, and always a threat to go after the football, leading the league with 5 forced fumbles there. But just a little bit more of a pass rush specialist than I think they would be looking for with this role. Clowney still gives you some of that, but is a little bit more reliable on those early down situations. So that's why I lean in that direction. But again, when you're looking at the market here for what's out there, in the edge rusher role. There are still plenty of guys that the Patriots have to choose from on the open market where they would not have to go out and necessarily give up any draft capital to bring a guy like that into the building, even going back to a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau. So I think that there are certainly options for them on the free agent market, and they should be exploring those. All right, Tyler, what do you got next?
Interior offensive line, which I think is just been a big key of concern all offseason. But if you look at what the Patriots have right now in this little break this summer that they have where they're not getting reps on the field, they pretty much have an offensive line. But it's, again, insurance policies. I think that's what we're talking about here. The Patriots right now, everybody's kind of predicting them to be playing in January. I'm not going to comment if they're going to be playing in February yet, but most likely they will be playing in January. That's a long season. I think the long season took its toll on this offensive line by the time we got to the postseason. So they need a good insurance policy player to kind of come in and do the interior offensive line. If need be, you got Elijah Vera Tucker on a 3-year deal. You know, we've talked about how banged up he can get. I think there's got to be some sort of program going on to keep him healthy. It'd be great to see him on the field every week in his first year of his contract. Second, third year, I don't know, but let's talk about 2026 right now. And I look at a couple guys that they can bring in at the guard or potentially shift into center. Some of them are, have got, they've burned a lot of tread. They're veterans and whatnot, but I still think if you want to plug somebody in on a 1-year deal, guys like Kevin Zeitler, who's a veteran out of Tennessee, right and left guard. I believe he's like 36 years old. I know that is just, you want to cringe at something like that. Free agent, played for Tennessee. And I know when people hear the Tennessee talk, I don't think he was there when Vrabel was there. No, he wasn't. Yeah. So there's no real connection there, but coaches compete with each other 6 months out of the year, and they're talking about players the other 6 months out of the year. Who can they sign and whatnot? I know Vrabel still got connections to Tennessee, even though he hasn't been there for some time. So you can look at something like that, a guy that if a Vera Tucker goes down or Onwenu goes down, maybe plug a vet in there for a month span of time and give rest reps and whatnot. But I don't want to go with someone that old. No offense to the guy. But still, as a veteran, James Daniels, who Miami just released, guy, again, is kind of an NFL journeyman, played with the Bears, played with the Steelers, can be a guard, can also be a center, proven insurance if there's some struggles for guys like Wilson and whatnot that we may or may not see. I got a lot of confidence in Wilson this year, but again, long season. So I kind of think maybe your best bet could be a guy like James Daniels. There has been a bit of a transit between Miami and New England over the last few years with players coming and going there. I don't know who talks to who with GMs and whatnot. I mean, Julian Hill came from Miami. So, you've seen a lot of teams transit between the Jets and the Patriots for many years. And I think now it's just a South Beach and a Cape Cod situation, I guess, between these two teams. So, maybe there's a lot of conversations there behind the scenes with getting a guy like Daniels. But again, it's all about insurance. It's all about this potentially being a long season. We can't just throw anybody out there to protect Drake May. Because if we're going to be 12-5, 11-6, whatever, and Drake May is getting sacked 5 times in the playoffs, we might not be as lucky as we were this past season. So again, get somebody kind of under there, somebody who you can fluctuate, move around, play either side of the offensive line as a guard. And then I also want to touch on Caleb Lomu, the first-round draft pick for the Patriots. Has had, I talked about it last week. He had some reps kind of moving around the offensive line a little bit, working with first, second, and even third teams. That is another thing the Patriots can explore if they need, if he's not going to be on the field as a starter week 1. But we shall see on that matter, because I like the idea of giving the kid reps around the offensive line, making him versatile while he's young, or even more versatile than he already is. So, the offensive line, just a very key, delicate situation that I feel the Patriots have done a good job with, but I still think they need just 1 or 2 guys in there to give a breath of fresh air in case someone goes down.
Yeah, interior offensive line has certainly been a need that we've discussed throughout the entirety of the offseason. before and after the signing of Elijah Vera Tucker, who you mentioned has dealt with injuries pretty consistently throughout this point in his career. He's missed 3 of his 5 career seasons, or at least in some part due to season-ending injuries. So not a shoo-in that he's going to be available for you for every game during the regular season. I know it's only been 1 year, but Jared Wilson also missed some time last year with a couple of different nagging injuries that he was dealing with. So there are some question marks even among the starters along that offensive line. And really, you only have one rotational depth piece at this point, with Ben Brown acting as that kind of super sub along each of the 3 interior positions, left guard, right guard, and center. He's taken snaps at all of those. After that, it is an absolute mystery. And I think it just really comes down to how the Patriots want to construct their offensive line for the regular season. How many of these guys do they want to keep around on the roster? If you're running out there with 8 offensive linemen, you have your 5 starters. You have Caleb Lomu as a backup tackle. You have Ben Brown as your backup along the interior. There's your 7. Are you keeping just one more offensive lineman at that point? Is that going to be a tackle? It seems like we're heading towards a training camp battle between Marcus Bryant and Demetrius Crownover for that last tackle role. But are you going to push it to 9 to keep an extra guard around? Or are you going to just roll out there with 8 and say, okay, we feel confident enough in Caleb Lomu to be the backup at multiple different positions? I don't know if that is necessarily or was necessarily plan A going into this offseason, is to draft a lineman in the first round and have him act as a backup for 4 different offensive line positions in his rookie year while he's trying to learn a brand new position at right tackle after spending the vast majority of his collegiate career as a left tackle at Utah. I think that this was one of those spots where the Patriots were looking to draft somebody maybe in that 4th round range. They had 2 4th round picks initially going into the draft. Of course, traded both of those away. One of them in that deal to go out and get Caleb Lomu moving up in the 1st round, and then another one to go out and get Gabe Akis moving up again in the 2nd round, and kind of lost their opportunity there. We did see them bring in a couple of undrafted rookie free agents with John Darius Morgan and Jacob Rizzi, but neither of those guys getting any significant run through the spring. And again, we saw a lot more Caleb Lomu rotating in with the starters on the interior than we saw either of those players. So certainly an option for them to go out and get interior offensive line help. That would certainly put me at ease with the state of that room, especially as a whole moving forward, knowing some of the injury concerns that they do have already with that group.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's an insurance policy for the Patriots to move forward. And it's really been the key component, despite the AJ Brown thing. It's let's keep Drake May protected moving forward. So yeah.
All right, so my last position here that we're going to talk about as like a solo position group here would be off-ball linebacker, and this is a position that the Patriots again would be looking more for another depth addition. Both of your starters are returning last year, with Robert Spillane and Christian Ellis clearly leading the way, but they lost both of their rotational substitutes this offseason with the departures of Jack Gibbons and Marte Mapu. KJ Britt was brought in free agency to presumably take over Jack Gibbons' role from last season, and we knew the Patriots were going to be looking at linebackers during the NFL draft to round out that room. It took New England until the 6th round before they added Nnamdi Obiizor, and they doubled down with the signing of Khalil Jacobs as an undrafted rookie free agent after the NFL draft. But neither of those guys got much run this spring, and we saw Britt on and off the field as he dealt with some sort of injury himself. As a result of that, we saw a lot more of Chad Muma on the field wearing the green dot and calling out the defensive plays at the line of scrimmage. He's a former 3rd round pick by the Indianapolis Colts, so I guess there's still some potential for more contributions from him, but seeing the lack of involvement from their younger players and injuries already affecting the group this early on in the spring brought me back to thinking that they're still just a little bit thin at linebacker. Let's not forget how significant a role Jack Gibbens played in the defense last year as Robert Spillane dealt with his own injuries that limited him in the latter stages of the regular season and into the playoffs. So if New England faces a situation like that again, I'd like to have a little bit more certainty in their backup plan at the position. Maybe that ultimately ends up being some combination of Britt, Muma, and the rookies, but I'd be more comfortable bringing in an established veteran while that door is still open. Guys like Matt Milano, Kenneth Murray, Bobby Okereke, Landon Roberts, Bobby Wagner are all still available on the open market and will give you some more security if they needed to play a significant number of snaps at any point in the season due to injury. Again, not at the top of my list here, but another one of those depth adds that I think should be considered as we get closer to training camp, Tyler.
Yeah. You mentioned Bobby Wagner. I mean, we're bringing in a lot of veterans here on a short contract deal. I mean, we'll talk about our guy Byard maybe in just a few minutes. But Bobby Wagner, 15th year, I'm sure he's looking for maybe one last kind of run at it if, that would be a thing with the Patriots. The one thing I want to bring up is this kind of goes for any position is how lucrative the market to come play in Foxborough is right now. Vrabel has a huge pull, huge attraction to come play in Foxborough, even if it's for a brief amount of time. I like a guy named like Bobby Wagner who can kind of come in, maybe work with some of these younger guys as well and develop them a little bit on a one-year deal and, bounce out of there. And then you got who they brought in to pretty much take shape in year 2 and year 3. And I think there could be a big benefactor there. And you mentioned, I also kind of saw names like Devin Lloyd in the mix as well. Good run tackler, guy who can really stop the run, something, we saw the Patriots struggle against good teams. So I'd like to see something like that as well. But yeah, I didn't even know Bobby Wagner was on the free agent market before we hopped on this show. So that's pretty exciting to see. I know he's on the Commanders last year. So we'll, that's definitely, there's a lot of options, but who knows for the Pats.
Yeah, and just a clarification here, Devin Lloyd was picked up by the Carolina Panthers this offseason after he spent the first 4 years of his career there with the Jacksonville Jaguars, a player that I really liked when he was coming out of Utah a few years back, but hasn't necessarily lived up to the projection that a lot of people have had for him at this point in his career. But again, depth linebacker could be another one of those positions that you're looking at for more of a rotational substitute. Again, we saw how important that was last year for the Patriots to have in the building with Jack Gibbens. He was a Vrabel guy through and through, multiple stops with him along his career journey. So you felt a little bit more comfortable when he had to step into the game that he knew exactly what the expectations were of him in that role. A little bit more uncertainty, even with a guy like KJ Britt, how he's going to exactly fit. Sounds like they've liked him when he was on the field, but again, dealing with those injuries that have kind of kept him on and off the field throughout the course of the spring here. All right, Tyler, we're going to wrap this one up by grouping these last few position groups together, not necessarily positions that are at the top of the pecking order here for the Patriots to go out and add to, but maybe again, as we're talking about more of these depth additions, some question marks that we had throughout the course of the offseason that the Patriots didn't necessarily directly address with some of their moves through free agency or through the NFL draft. So on the list here, we have punter, defensive back, so kind of encompassing cornerback and safety there, and nose tackle. How are we feeling about the depth at those positions? Which ones out of those do you see them adding to before the start of training camp here?
I have a lot of, maybe, I don't know. I have a lot of kind of uncertainty in terms of all these, because you look at nose tackle, having Tonga leave was brutal to see after just such a remarkable season he had. Maybe a guy like Durden does step in and really show us what he's made of. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if they do explore a nose tackle. Out of all these three, I could see them exploring nose tackle probably the most. if I look at defensive back, obviously the 1-year deal on Byard, I look at maybe they bring somebody else in, but Byard to me still seems very active, still seems very dominant. I think he's going to love to play here, hopefully. Be back with Vrabel again. That he could turn into like a year-to-year thing. I know he's getting up there and whatnot. That, you know, what if he finishes the last 2-3 seasons here as the starter of his career, as the starter in New England? I'd be open to that. Again, like kind of just like a year-to-year thing with how he kind of takes shape. I think he's going to be a strong leader of this secondary, maybe even this defense. But that's not to say that there should be someone else kind of brought in underneath him to learn. If that year-to-year thing develops into year 2 and whatnot, maybe that's when maybe they draft someone or whatnot. The hardest thing on here on this list is punter. When you sent me the rundown, I was like, the free agent market for punters in 2026 is so thin that I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, Behringer, he's in the final year of his rookie contract, and that could mean the Patriots make him, I don't know, like maybe they re-sign him and whatnot. But I think he's a pretty solid punter. I thought we were going to have a competition at special teams this offseason, but I don't know who the Pats can bring in. It's hard to kind of study backup punters in my mind, honestly. But, you know, if they have no one else at depth, I think they should create some sort of competition in minicamp, bring in some undrafted free agent and see what the Pats kind of can, you know, make of this and maybe sign him on a cheap situation. And we'll see where we're at the end of the 2026 season.
Yeah, I'll start with punter here because I think this is actually the most likely that we get an additional body for training camp in. And I think it's nothing due to where they're at right now with Bryce Behringer. I think that they really like what he's given them over the course of the past few seasons, not even just last year with Vrabel. When they were talking at the NFL scouting combine, it felt like they were set at their specialist positions. And that's kind of how they were looking at it, because we even talked about a while back leading up to the draft, maybe one of those 7th round picks or a late 6th round pick could be used on a punter, as they did last offseason, both drafting a kicker and a long snapper for the team. Punter was the only position that they didn't replace. And as you mentioned, Behringer going into the last year of his rookie contract right now is kind of the time where you have to decide, are we going to extend this player or are we going to look for a replacement plan for him? And that's normally when you get some additional competition in the room there, especially during training camp. They did not go out and draft a punter, which tells me that they're still very much contemplating keeping Behringer around for the long term, and you didn't want to add another leg on a 4-year contract by drafting a player at that position. But we also haven't seen them formally sign a player to add to the roster as direct competition for Behringer at this point. They brought in a couple of players. Mitch McCarthy, a former Indiana punter, tried out during rookie minicamp. Devin Blay, a former Arkansas Razorback punter, tried out during mandatory minicamp. Neither of those led to an official signing, but I think that this is still probably a spot where maybe you get a relatively unknown player at this point. As you mentioned, the free agent market for punters isn't necessarily loaded with talent at this point right now, whatever that looks like for the punter position as a free agent. But this is kind of the time now where you decide, are we going to extend this player or are we going to look for his replacement? And it just makes sense to bring in another leg. If Behringer beats him out, great, you have your answer. If not, you're one step closer to finding that long-term answer at the position. As far as defensive backs go, I think that the Patriots, yes, there have been depth questions about both corner and safety all offseason long. It seems like they really like what they've gotten out of a few players that they added for depth roles in free agency, with Kindle Vildor at corner and with Mike Brown at safety behind the starters. So I think a little bit slower to add to those positions. It looks like Karan Prunty, the Patriots' 5th-round draft pick, also had a really nice spring, intercepted Drake May in 11 on 11s. So maybe a little bit more of a projection there for him than we were necessarily anticipating when we were ripping the pick a little bit soon after they made it. I said this is probably going to end up being like a Craig Woodson situation where everybody questions it as soon as he gets drafted, and by the end of the year, he turns himself into a reliable contributor, albeit on a much more limited snap count than we saw from a player like Craig Woodson last season. And nose tackle, I'm kind of right in line with you on. I think this is a spot where they could add to, just as far as a profile, a body size profile. Kairos Tonga leaves. It seems like Corey Durden at least thinks that he is going to fill that role. Mike Vrabel was not as definitive in his response when he was asked about Durden's upcoming role this season. He said he'll have the opportunity to fill in at nose tackle and compete for reps there. But again, another one of these players where it feels very weird to talk about a 305-pound man being a little bit too small, but you're looking at nose tackles playing directly over the center, typically being 320, 330 plus pounds right now. The guy that they have that fits that mold a little bit more so on the roster is Eric Gregory, but he hasn't really seen a ton of defensive snaps for the Patriots over the last couple of seasons. So not necessarily sure that they're going to be depending on him to take that much of a step up this season. So that could be a role where they look to fill it. But I think that they look at the interior defensive line as one of the strengths of their team, and they feel like they can find some bodies in-house to kind of plug that gap in. You still have Joshua Farmer coming up that I was really high on in last offseason's draft when they picked him up. Had his season cut short due to injury last season. So maybe a step up in contributions from him this year, now entering year 2 of his professional career. But again, those positions, I feel like they probably feel like they have some in-house answers at right now. Punter is a little bit different of a situation, so I would put that a little bit ahead of either nose tackle or defensive back there. Any other thoughts before we kind of wrap things up here, Tyler?
No, nothing really. Again, just kind of back to my point to kind of, I guess, my final take on the episode here, I guess, is that, it's going to be a long season, we're predicting. And there's still some voids to fill. There's still going to be, competition's going to get very stiff when we get in a few months, or in a month, I should say, into preseason and whatnot. They officially just broke last night. The Eagles will be having practices with the Patriots on August 19th and 20th. So I'm sure A.J. Brown will pose for the cameras with his former team, but once the pads come on, it's going to be physical. But that's also going to be when they're practicing against each other. There's, the Pats, basically what I'm getting at is the Pats need to kind of bring in somebody that might not be a starter for these roles, but can basically give them, ease their worries a little bit in terms of if players go down in November and December. Do they have a good insurance policy if we lose somebody on the offensive line? If Elijah Vera Tucker does get injured late in the year, if Hunter Henry, God forbid, gets injured in the year, can Eli Raridan kind of step in a little more? But do we also have somebody else out there to kind of work on that offensive line and do some blocking for the run game? Maybe get downfield 10, 12, 15 yards as well, just to keep the ball rolling. So, yeah, it's all about who we can kind of bring up on the rear behind the starters. And there are going to be some decisions to make, some big decisions, some WTF decisions with the punter. But again, I don't think they're going to worry about that right now, like you said. So, that's my closing argument, I guess.
Yeah, lots of roster turnover this offseason, but again, even kind of going back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, much different position for the Patriots to be in this offseason, where we're talking about these roles as being the 3rd or 4th linebacker, as being the 4th corner, or the 3rd safety. These are not starting positions that the Patriots are looking for upgrades at. It feels like they're very set with their starters on both sides of the ball. And that's a good feeling heading into training camp here, how those training camp battles play out and those players that earn roster spots. I think especially when the pads go on in training camp, you have those joint practices come up, much better litmus test for where your team is at in comparison to the rest of the league at this point early on in the season. I think that's going to tell us a lot more about where they're at with some of these depth roles and where they feel like they still may need to add come training camp. All right, guys, if this is your first touch point with us, we'd like to thank you for being here with us and for staying all the way until the end. For more from us on the Patriots, be sure to head over to the Patriots Roundtable website at roundtable.io. And if you're enjoying what we do with the show on a weekly basis, the best way you could possibly support us is by joining as a member on the Roundtable website. It's fast, it's easy, and it's completely free. And your membership allows you to join the discussion directly with us. We're trying to build a great community of sports fans over on the site, and your membership would help greatly with that. So head over to roundtable.io by using the link in the description below and tell us what you think. Which positions do you see the Patriots adding to before the start of training camp? Let us know in the comments section below or over on the community boards on the Roundtable website. We look forward to seeing you there. For Tyler Geis, I'm Eddie Murata. From all of us here at Patriots Roundtable, we'd like to thank you again for listening. We are signing off. Until next time.